The air in the Ironwood Garrison's mess hall was thick enough to chew. It tasted of stale ale, sweat, wood smoke, and the kind of testosterone-fueled certainty I had only ever read about in books. At the center of it all, like twin gods holding court, were Cole and Dean. Cole was a mountain of a man, his arms a road map of old scars, each one with a story he'd only tell after his third flagon of ale. A thick, dark beard covered the lower half of his face, and his chest hair spilled from the collar of his worn leather tunic. He was my mentor, the master at arms, and the man I most wanted to be. Dean, his second in command, was the fire to Cole's earth. His laugh was a booming thunderclap that shook the rafters, his blonde hair a messy halo in the torchlight. He moved with a restless energy, always ready for a fight or a joke, often both at the same time. Tonight, they were celebrating. A skirmish with raiders at the northern pass had ended, as it always did, with them victorious. They held their mugs high, regaling the room with tales of the battle, their voices weaving a tapestry of heroism that left me breathless. Barmaids hung on their words, their eyes wide with adoration. Younger soldiers listened with a reverence usually reserved for priests. And then there was me, Leo, the apprentice. I sat in a shadowed corner, nursing a cup of watered-down wine, feeling as substantial as a ghost. Where they were broad and scarred, I was narrow and smooth. Where their hands were calloused from sword hilts, mine were soft. Smelling faintly of the vegetable soup I'd helped prepare in the kitchens. My tunic hung on my frame, the belt cinched to its tightest notch just to keep it from looking like a sack. I was a footnote in their epic tale. Cole's eyes found me. A flicker of something pity, maybe in their depths. "Soup boy, you drop any pots today?" The hall erupted in good-natured laughter. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I tried to smile, to play along, but my lips felt stiff. Dean grinned, though his eyes were kinder than his words. Leave him be. Cole, he's got to protect that pretty face of his. One good brawl and it's ruined forever. More laughter. I looked down at my hands, at the unblemished skin. I longed for a scar. Just one. A single mark that would prove I had lived, that I had faced something more dangerous than a boiling kettle. Later, as the crowd thinned, Cole lumbered over to my table. The wood groaned as he sat opposite me. He leaned forward, the smell of leather and sweat a powerful, masculine perfume. "You watch," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You sit in your corner and you watch everything. What are you looking for, Leo?" I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "I want to be like you." "Sir." The confession came out as a whisper. He grunted, a sound that wasn't unkind. He picked up a stray knife and started cleaning his nails with the tip. "Everyone wants to be the man with the stories. No one wants to earn the scars that come with them." He looked up, his gaze pinning me in place. Wanting to be a real man means being willing to endure and to sacrifice. Remember that. He clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, the force of it nearly sending me off the bench. Then he stood and rejoined Dean by the fire, their laughter once again filling the space where my own words had died. I sat there, the weight of his hand still tingling on my shoulder. Sacrifice. The word echoed in my mind. I didn't know then what it meant, but a desperate, foolish part of me was willing to do anything to find out. I watched them, my heroes, my mentors, the very definition of everything I wasn't, and a silent promise formed in my heart. I would find a way. I would prove I was more than just the soup boy. That night, as they finally left the hall, their arms around each other as they bellowed a drunken shanty into the cold night air, I slipped out after them. I didn't know why. I just knew I couldn't bear to be left behind in the shadows any longer. The night was sharp and cold, the stars like chips of ice in the black sky. I kept a safe distance, my soft-soled boots making no sound on the cobblestones as I followed Cole and Dean. Their boisterous energy had faded, replaced by the easy camaraderie of men who had fought and bled together for years. Then, chaos erupted. It started with a scream from the direction of the main square. Not a woman's cry of fear, but a man's, raw and guttural. Another followed, then a crash of steel on stone. Cole and Dean exchanged a look, their drunkenness vanishing in an instant. They drew their swords, the rasp of metal slicing through the night. I flattened myself against a wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. A man stumbled out of the square, a garrison guard I recognized. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unfocused. He mumbled something, his words slurring together. Her eyes, like embers. A goddess. He collapsed before he reached us. Cole and Dean didn't hesitate. They moved toward the square with the fluid deadliness of hunting wolves. I, driven by a mixture of terror and a desperate need not to be seen as a coward, crept after them, using the deep shadows of the buildings as cover. The square was a scene of madness, men strong. Disciplined soldiers I had seen train every day were acting like fools. Some were on their knees, staring with slack-jawed awe. Others were fighting each other, clumsy, brutal swings fueled by some unseen rage. And at the center of it all, the cause of the chaos, was a woman. She stood by the central fountain, bathed in the cold moonlight. Her gown was the color of blood and midnight, a swirl of red and black silk that clung to her form. Her hair was a cascade of black ink, so long it nearly touched the ground. She was beautiful, but it was a terrifying beauty, sharp and predatory, like a perfectly crafted dagger. Her presence seemed to suck the warmth from the air. This was Lilith. She raised a hand, and the brawling men froze. Her voice, when she spoke, wasn't loud, but it cut through the night like a shard of glass. "You have forgotten the true meaning of power," she said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "You think it lies in brute strength and loud voices. Allow me to remind you." Cole stepped forward, his sword held steady. "This is our garrison. Which? Leave now, or be carried out?" Lilith's eyes, which truly did seem to glow with a faint, inner light, settled on him. She laughed, a sound like icicles shattering. "Your beard and your scars are just a costume. Warrior. I see the little boy beneath them, afraid of being weak." Cole roared and charged, but he never reached her. He slowed, his steps becoming heavy, his sword tip dipping toward the ground. He shook his head as if trying to clear it of water. Dean rushed to his side, pulling him back. "Her magic is in the mind," Dean snarled, his face a mask of fury and confusion. "Don't look at her." But it was impossible not to. She was a vortex, pulling every eye, every thought, toward her. I could feel it myself, a strange, sweet lethargy trying to creep into my bones, a desire to simply kneel and bask in her terrible radiance. It was the awe I felt for Cole and Dean, twisted into something dark and subservient. Lilith watched them struggle, her expression one of amused contempt. She didn't need to fight. She was winning just by being there. With a final dismissive glance, she turned and walked away, her red and black dress flowing behind her like a river of blood. She vanished into the darkness, leaving a wake of dazed, broken men. Cole leaned heavily on Dean, breathing hard. The spell was broken, but its residue lingered. The square was silent now, save for the groans of the wounded. "What was that?" Cole finally managed to say, his voice strained. "A power I've never seen," Dean admitted, his own face grim. "It doesn't break bones. It breaks will." They knew, in that moment, that swords and shields would be useless against her. They were warriors, built to face physical threats. This was something else entirely. As they helped the other men to their feet, their expressions were ones I had never seen on them before: fear and a dawning, terrifying helplessness. It was in the captain's office, hours later, that the desperate plan was born. I was there, clearing away mugs, trying to make myself invisible, when Elias, the garrison's oldest and most reclusive scholar, was summoned. He was a whisper of a man, with skin like parchment and eyes that held the dust of ancient libraries. He listened to their account, his fingers steepled before him. When they were finished, he was silent for a long time. "There is a way," he finally said, his voice a dry rustle. "An old way, a forbidden ritual. It is said that this kind of sorcery, which preys on masculine pride and aggression, can be baffled by that which it does not understand. To fight her, you cannot meet her as men." He paused, his gaze heavy. "The ritual requires a sacrifice. You must surrender the very essence of what makes you who you are, your strength, your vigor, your manhood. It must be given away, transferred, so that you can assume a form she cannot dominate." Cole slammed his fist on the table. "Speak plainly. Old man." Elias did not flinch. "To defeat the witch, you must become women." The room fell into a stunned silence. Dean laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." "The magic is real," Elias insisted. "It will reshape you, grant you a form that her enchantments will slide off of. But your masculine power cannot be destroyed. It must have a vessel, a recipient." His ancient eyes, slowly, deliberately, turned to me. I froze, a half-empty mug in my hand. Cole and Dean followed his gaze. For a moment, all three of them stared at me, the insignificant apprentice hiding in the corner. Desperation was a powerful acid. It could dissolve even the most rigid beliefs. "Him?" Cole asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "He is here. He is loyal. He is empty enough to be filled," Elias said, his words clinical and strangely final. And in their eyes, I saw the decision being made to save the garrison, to defeat a foe they couldn't possibly fight. They would do the unthinkable. They would sacrifice themselves, and I, Leo, would be the unintended beneficiary of that sacrifice. A terrifying, exhilarating thrill shot through me. My life was about to change forever. The chamber was deep beneath the garrison, a place of dust and forgetting. The air was cold and still, smelling of damp stone and old magic. A circle of runes, drawn in what looked like faded chalk, covered the floor, and a dozen tallow candles cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. Elias stood at the edge of the circle, his voice a low, chanting drone as he recited words from an ancient, leather-bound book. Cole and Dean stood in the center of the circle, stripped to their breeches. I stood just outside, my hands clenched into fists. My role in this strange play still unclear. I was to be a witness, a vessel, a thing. The first step of the ritual was the unmaking. "Your armor has defined you," Elias intoned. "It is your second skin. It must be shed." With visible reluctance, they began to remove the last vestiges of their warrior identities, the heavy leather vambraces, the steel-toed boots, the thick belts that held their weapons. Each piece of discarded gear landed on the stone floor with a heavy, final thud. The sounds echoed in the silence between Elias's chants. Stripped of their familiar coverings, they looked exposed, vulnerable in a way I had never seen. The cold air raised goosebumps on their scarred, muscular arms. This wasn't just about removing clothing, it was about peeling away layers of who they were. Next came the oils. Elias handed them each a small clay pot filled with a fragrant, viscous liquid. "The herbs will soften the vessel, make it pliable for the change." They hesitated, then began to rub the oil into their skin. The scent of lavender and something else, something sharper and more metallic, filled the chamber. I watched as the slick fluid made their muscles gleam in the candlelight. They moved with a grim determination, their faces set like stone. It was an act of anointing, a preparation for a sacrifice I could barely comprehend. Then, Elias brought out the corsets. They weren't made of fancy satin, but of thick, unforgiving black leather, reinforced with what looked like thin strips of steel. They were instruments of reconstruction, designed to reshape a body by force. Dean went first. He held his breath as Elias's assistants, two silent acolytes I'd never seen before, began to pull the laces at his back. I heard the creak of the leather, the sharp hiss of air escaping Dean's lungs. "Tighter," Elias commanded. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the laces were pulled taut, cinching his waist, forcing his broad shoulders back and his chest out. His powerful torso was being compressed, molded into a shape it was never meant to hold. His posture changed immediately. He was forced to stand ramrod straight, his breathing becoming shallower, faster. A sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. "I feel like I'm being crushed," he gasped, his voice strained. Cole was next. He endured it with a silent, teeth-gritting stoicism. His massive chest and thick abdomen fought against the constriction, but the leather and steel were relentless. The corset forced an alien silhouette upon him, a narrowed waist, an artificially defined torso. The change was visually jarring. The sheer power of his male form was being bound, contained, and altered. Then came the chest plates. They were cleverly crafted pieces of hardened leather, molded to resemble a woman's breasts, but built with the sturdiness of armor. Elias's acolytes strapped them on, the leather groaning as it was secured over their chests. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The plates created a new center of gravity, a weight and presence on their upper bodies that was utterly foreign. Dean swayed slightly, trying to find his balance. Cole simply stared down at his own altered form, his expression a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "The body teaches the mind," Elias chanted. "The new shape will carve a new path for the spirit." The final touches were subtle, but deeply unnerving. A fine powder was dusted onto their faces. softening the hard lines of their jaws. A dark kohl was used to line their eyes, not for beauty, but to change the focus of their faces, making their eyes seem larger, more expressive. They're rough. Calloused hands were slipped into long, soft leather gloves that reached their elbows, hiding the scars and making their fingers appear more slender. Their hair was unfastened from its usual warrior's knots and brushed out, framing their faces in a new, softer way. Then, Elias brought out a large, polished bronze mirror. He held it up to them. I saw the moment their minds fractured. The men in the mirror were not them. They were tall, powerfully built women, warriors of a kind I had only read about in myths. The familiar faces of Cole and Dean were still there, but they were trapped beneath a new reality. The corsets forced a posture of defiant elegance. The chest plates gave them a feminine, yet formidable, silhouette. The kohl-lined eyes held a new, startling intensity. Cole stared at his reflection, his jaw working, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Dean just looked lost. He touched his own face, as if to make sure it was still there beneath the illusion. "Now," Elias said, turning his ancient gaze to me, "the power must be transferred. Place your hands upon them. Boy, become the vessel." My legs felt like lead as I stepped into the circle. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I was terrified, not of them, but of the crackling energy that now filled the room. I reached out, my hands trembling, and placed one on Cole's shoulder and the other on Dean's. The moment I made contact, it was like being struck by lightning. A torrent of energy, hot and overwhelming, surged from them into me. It wasn't a gentle flow, it was a violent, painful flood. I cried out as I felt their strength, years of training, of battle, of raw, masculine power pour into my body. My muscles seized, contracting and then expanding with an explosive force. I felt a fire ignite in my blood, a tingling heat that spread through every inch of me. My vision blurred, and the sound of Elias's chanting became a distant roar. I felt taller, stronger. The loose tunic suddenly felt tight across my chest and shoulders. When I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, the voice that came out was not my own. It was deeper, richer, resonant with an authority I had never known. "It is done," Elias said, his voice cutting through the haze in my mind. I staggered back, my body thrumming with a power that felt both exhilarating and deeply wrong. I looked at Cole and Dean. They were still standing, but they seemed diminished. The raw, aggressive energy that had always radiated from them was gone. In its place was something else, something quieter, more contained, but no less dangerous. They looked at me, and in their eyes, I saw shock, resentment, and a dawning horror. They had sacrificed their power, and I had taken it all. The dawn that followed the ritual was gray and unforgiving. The three of us stood in the training yard, the chill morning air a harsh slap of reality. The rest of the garrison was still asleep, a mercy for which I was profoundly grateful. I didn't know how to face them, how to explain what I had become, or what had been done to my mentors. Cole and Dean were dressed in new attire Elias had provided. It wasn't silk gowns, but practical, modified armor. They wore hardened leather corsets over simple tunics, flexible leather skirts split for movement, and tall, sturdy boots. The molded chest plates were now integrated into their leather breastplates. It was the garb of warrior women, functional and deadly, but every line of it was an assault on who they used to be. I felt like a stranger in my own skin. The power thrumming through me was a constant, buzzing current. My body felt denser, more solid. When I picked up a training sword, it felt as light as a stick. The first training session was a disaster. "All right," Cole said, his voice softer than it used to be, lacking its familiar gravelly edge. "We practiced the northern advance. On my mark." He tried to demonstrate, charging a training dummy, but his movements were all wrong. His new center of gravity threw him off balance. The corset restricted his torso, preventing him from twisting for a powerful swing. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell, his face a mask of pure frustration. Dean tried next. He was more adaptable, attempting to incorporate a new, almost dance-like quality to his movements, but it was hesitant, uncertain. He swung his sword, and the follow-through was awkward, the power he put behind it a shadow of his former strength. I watched them struggle, a knot of guilt tightening in my stomach. This was my fault. Their weakness was my strength. "No," I heard myself say. The word came out firm, commanding. Both of them stopped and looked at me, their eyes wide with surprise. I had never contradicted them in my life. "Your balance is too high," I said, the knowledge coming to me unbidden, as if it had been poured into my brain along with their strength. "You're trying to fight like men, with power from your shoulders and back. You can't do that anymore. The power has to come from your hips, from your legs. It has to be faster, more precise." I stepped forward and took up a stance. "Like this," I said, and demonstrated a series of fluid strikes and parries, my body moving with a grace and speed that I had never possessed. The sword was an extension of my arm. Cole stared at me, his expression unreadable. "The student teaches the master," he muttered, the words laced with bitterness. "It's not about mastery," I said, my voice softer. "It's about survival. Lilith won't fight fair. She'll expect you to be slow and clumsy in these new forms. We have to use it against her." Slowly, painstakingly, we began again. I found myself directing them, correcting their stances, guiding their movements. It was the most surreal experience of my life. I was telling Cole, the man who taught me how to hold a sword, how to fight. And he, after a moment of bristling pride, listened. Dean adapted more quickly, a flicker of grudging curiosity in his eyes as he discovered that a spin or a sidestep could generate as much defensive power as a solid block. The physical awkwardness was mirrored by 1,000 smaller indignities. Cole's long hair, which he'd always kept tied back, kept falling in his face until Dean, with a sigh of exasperation, took a leather tie and braided it for him. The act was simple, practical, but the intimacy of it made them both freeze for a moment. Cole stood stiffly as Dean's fingers, now clad in soft leather gloves, deftly wove the strands together. It was a gesture of care I had never seen between them. Later, while taking a break, Dean's hand went unconsciously to the amulet he always wore, a heavy iron symbol of a wolf's head. It looked strange now, resting against the curve of his armored chest plate. He noticed me looking and quickly dropped his hand, a flush of shame on his cheeks. "It feels wrong," he said quietly. "Everything feels wrong. The way the air moves against my skin, the way my boots sound on the ground. It's like being a ghost in my own body. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," was all I could manage, and the words felt pathetic, inadequate. Cole, who had been silently watching us, spoke up. "Sorry doesn't win a war. Leo." He looked at his own gloved hands, turning them over. "This is the price. We're paying it. Now you have to make sure it was worth it." His words were a cold weight in my stomach. The power I held wasn't a gift, it was a debt. And the only way to repay it was to lead these two legendary warriors, now trapped in the bodies of women, into a battle against a sorceress who could break men with a glance, for the first time. The thrill of my new strength was completely eclipsed by the terrifying weight of responsibility. In the weeks that followed, the changes became more than just a costume. The magic of the ritual was a slow-acting poison, or a potent medicine, depending on your point of view. It continued its work, subtly and relentlessly reshaping not just their bodies, but our lives. The power transfer hadn't been a one-time event. Every time Cole and Dean sparred, every time they pushed themselves and drew upon the dregs of their old strength, I felt a faint echo of it, another trickle of power flowing from them to me. It was like they were leaking, and I was the bucket catching the drips. My own transformation was overt. I filled out, my shoulders broadening, my voice settling into a confident baritone. I could lift barrels that had once required two men, and my senses felt sharper, more acute. I was no longer the soup boy. When I walked through the garrison, soldiers stepped aside. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. I was becoming a leader, and the role fit me with a terrifying ease. Their changes were more insidious. Cole's beard, which he'd stubbornly refused to shave, began to thin, the growth becoming patchy and soft. One morning he appeared in the training yard clean-shaven for the first time in a decade, his jawline noticeably softer. He didn't say a word about it, but the fury in his eyes was a storm. Dean's lean, muscular frame seemed to change its composition. The hard angles softened, and his waist narrowed further, a subtle shift in his hips making his walk more fluid. Their voices lost their last vestiges of masculine roughness, settling into smoother, feminine tones. The social fabric of the garrison strained and rewove itself around us. At first, there were whispers, cruel jokes muttered in corners, but then people saw them train. They saw these two tall, formidable women moving with a new, deadly grace, their fighting style a blur of precision and speed. The mockery turned to a stunned respect. They stopped calling them Cole and Dean. The soldiers, struggling to define what they were seeing, started calling them the Amazons of Ironwood. The name stuck. Women in the garrison began to look at them not as men in disguise, but as paragons of a new kind of female strength. Men looked at them with a confusing mix of their old camaraderie, a new, wary respect, and a flicker of something else and unnerved, reluctant attraction that left them flustered. This new dynamic created a chasm between us. I was their commander now, a role reversal that chafed at all three of us. My guilt was a constant companion, but it was mingled with a heady, addictive taste of authority. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. I felt powerful, and I was terrified that I was starting to like it too much. Cole fought the change with every fiber of his being. He was sullen, angry, his pride wounded to the core. He felt betrayed by his own body. The loss of his male identity was a raw, open wound. Dean, on the other hand, was more complex, I would sometimes catch him looking at his reflection in a polished shield, a strange, contemplative expression on his face. He discovered a new kind of power, the ability to disarm an opponent with a look, to command attention without a shout. He found a strange freedom in it, an exploration of a part of himself he never knew existed. But this acceptance created its own friction between him and Cole. The breaking point came during a public ceremony in the main square. I was to officially assume command of the garrison's defenses until the threat of Lilith was neutralized. I stood on the steps of the main hall, addressing the assembled soldiers, Cole and Dean, number Cora and Diana. As they were now sometimes called by the others, stood behind me, their new honor guard. They were magnificent, clad in their polished leather and steel. They looked like goddesses of war. The crowd stared at them, their respect palpable. But as I spoke of strategy and duty, I glanced back and saw Cole's face. In his eyes, beneath the stoic mask, was a flash of raw pain and resentment. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at me. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't just his commander. I was a living symbol of everything he had lost. The power I wielded, the respect I was being given, it was all his. It was his sacrifice, and I was the one reaping the rewards. The sweet taste of power in my mouth suddenly turned to ash. Lilith wasn't just a threat from outside the walls. Her magic had planted a seed of conflict right at the heart of our fractured little family, and I feared it would tear us apart before we ever had the chance to face her. Lilith did not launch another frontal assault. She was smarter than that. She retreated, letting her magic seep into the lands around the garrison like a slow, creeping frost. Reports came in of travelers losing their way, of hunting parties turning on each other, of a pervasive sense of despair settling over the nearby villages. She was testing us, probing our defenses, and waiting for the poison she had injected into our trio to do its work. The final confrontation was inevitable, and she chose the time and place. A missive, written on a black raven's feather, appeared on my desk. She would meet us on the frozen plains to the north at the next full moon. It was a challenge and a trap. The air on the plains was so cold it felt like breathing powdered glass. A vast, empty expanse of snow stretched out under a sickly full moon. The wind howled, whipping at our cloaks. I stood flanked by Cora and Diana. They had long since abandoned their old names, accepting the new ones the garrison had given them. It was easier that way. It was part of the armor. Lilith was waiting for us, a slash of red and black against the endless white. She looked no different than the last time we saw her, her beauty just as cold and perfect. "So," she said, her voice carrying easily on the wind. The broken warriors and their little crow, puffed up in borrowed feathers. "Did you truly think this pathetic masquerade would work?" "It got us here," I said, my hand resting on the hilt of my sword. My voice didn't waver. The power in my veins gave me that. At least, the fight began not with a clash of steel, but with a battle of wills. Lilith's magic washed over us, but it was different this time. It wasn't a wave of raw domination. It was a subtle, insidious whisper directed only at me. "They resent you." Her voice echoed in my mind, a seductive murmur that felt like my own thoughts. "Every ounce of strength in your body is a theft. They were legends. You made them this." I glanced at Cora and Diana. They stood ready, their faces grim. They couldn't hear her, but they could feel the pressure of her magic in the air. "We fight together," Cora said, her voice a clear note in the wind, a deliberate act of defiance against the unspoken tension between us. But Lilith's focus remained on me as we advanced. She didn't attack me directly. She sent phantom images at my companions, illusions of the raiders they had fought, the monsters they had slain. It was a tactic designed to keep them occupied, to isolate me. And then she spoke to me again, her mental voice dripping with sweet poison. You don't need them. Their time is past. Look at what you've become. Leo. Strong. A leader. Powerful. This is who you were always meant to be. They were just holding you back. I faltered, my sword strike going wide. Her words struck a chord deep inside me, playing on the secret, shameful pleasure I had taken in my new status. A part of me, the weak, overlooked boy from the corner of the mess hall, screamed that she was right. Let them go, Lilith offered, her lips curving into a smile as she saw the conflict in my eyes. Embrace what you are. They gave you this power. It is yours by right of sacrifice. All you have to do is keep it. Let them fade. You will be a king. The temptation was a physical thing, a warm, intoxicating pull. The power inside me surged. Agreeing with her, I could be more than just a commander. I could be absolute. I looked at Cora, who had just dispatched a shadow wolf with a fluid. Deadly grace she had perfected over the last few weeks. I looked at Diana, who was holding her ground against two spectral warriors, her movements precise and economical. They were fighting for me, for the garrison. Despite what it had cost them, they were diminished. Yes, they were changed, but they were not broken. Their honor, their courage, those were things the ritual could not touch. That was the strength I had always admired in them. Not their muscles, not their scars, but their spirit. And in that moment, I realized that true power wasn't about holding on to it. No, I said, first in my mind, and then out loud, my voice ringing across the frozen plain. Power isn't meant to be hoarded. It's meant to protect. I turned my gaze from Lilith back to my companions. My strength is their strength. I poured my will into that statement, a declaration of loyalty that severed Lilith's connection to my mind. Her smile vanished, replaced by a snarl of fury. The real battle began. It was a blur of strategy and instinct. Cora and Diana were no longer trying to be the men they had been. They fought as they were now. They used their speed and grace to harass and distract, their flowing cloaks and altered forms making them deceptive targets. They were the tide, eroding Lilith's defenses, creating openings. And I was the thunderclap. When they created a fractional moment of vulnerability, I struck with all the raw power they had given me. It wasn't a battle of one hero against a villain. It was the three of us. A single, coordinated unit. Our new dynamic finally forged into a weapon. In the end, I did not kill her. As she lay defeated in the snow, her magic shattered. I remembered Cole's words from so long ago. Being a man means being willing to endure. I had endured her temptation, but leadership meant more than just winning. It meant choosing the right path. We used the last of Elias's ritual components to create a binding circle, trapping her in a prison of ice and magic beneath the plains. Banished, not destroyed. It felt right. As we stood over the circle, breathing heavily in the freezing air, the exhaustion hit me. I had rejected absolute power. I had chosen them. And in doing so, I finally felt worthy of the strength I carried. The debt, at last, felt like it had been paid. The return to Ironwood Garrison was quiet. The victory was ours, but it didn't feel like a cause for celebration. It felt like the closing of a painful chapter. The world had been saved from Lilith, but our own small world had been irrevocably altered. In the months that followed, a new normal settled in. The magic of the ritual, its purpose served, began to fade, but it did not reverse. The changes it had wrought were permanent. Cora and Diana remained as they were, their new forms a part of their identity. My own augmented strength subsided from its peak, leaving me not as a demigod, but as a man who was simply stronger and more confident than the boy he had once been. The power had balanced out, leaving us all changed, but whole. Frostmere changed, too. The story of our victory spread, and with it, the legend of the Amazons of Ironwood. Cora and Diana became revered figures, their military leadership unquestioned. They trained the garrison's soldiers, both men and women, in their new fighting style, a blend of strength, speed, and strategic grace. They were respected not for the men they had been, but for the formidable leaders they now were. And I found my place not as their superior, but as their partner. The three of us formed a council, our different strengths creating a balanced leadership that the garrison had never known. One crisp autumn morning, I found Cora in her quarters. She was standing before a polished bronze mirror, the same one from the ritual chamber. She wasn't looking at her face, but at her arm. She traced the line of a thick, pale scar, a relic from her old life. It stood out against skin that had become smoother, less weathered. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked quietly from the doorway. She met my eyes in the reflection. Her expression was complex, holding the ghost of old pains but not the bitterness. "I miss the simplicity," she admitted, her voice a soft alto. "I miss knowing exactly who I was when I woke up in the morning. But the woman in this mirror, she is strong, too, just in a different way. It took me a long time to see that." Later, I found Diana in the armory, meticulously polishing her leather breastplate. She had added a small, intricate engraving of a wolf's head to it, right over her heart. She looked up as I approached and smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "It's strange," she said, holding up the armor. "I spent half my life trying to be the toughest man in any room. Now, I find there's a different kind of strength in being admired, in protecting people with your wits as much as your sword." She had found a new kind of freedom, a new way to express the fierce, vibrant spirit that had always defined her. I walked with them to the battlements to watch the sunrise. The sky was turning from bruised purple to a brilliant orange. We stood together, a comfortable silence between us. The roles of master and apprentice, of commander and soldier, had dissolved, leaving something far more solid in their place family. Cora put a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm and steady. It wasn't the crushing weight of the old coal, but the reassuring touch of an equal. "You did well, Leo," she said, not by holding on to the power, but by learning how to share it. "We stand together," I replied, the words feeling truer than anything I had ever said. Strong in our own ways. The transformation had been brutal. It had been born of desperation and sacrifice. We had been stripped down, reshaped, and forced to confront the very essence of our identities, The corsets and armor, the oils and chants, they hadn't just changed our bodies. They had been a crucible. They had forced us to look into a broken mirror and find the courage to piece together a new reflection, one that was stronger and more honest than the original. We were no longer just the brash warriors and their timid apprentice. We were something new, forged in magic and fire and choice. And as the sun cast our 3 long shadows across the courtyard, I knew, for the first time, that we were all exactly who we were meant to be.